Exhibit A is that 5 companies stole 90% of the internet in order to train their AIs. What more do you need to know? That toothpaste is not going back in that tube.
Welcome to CHATROG, the podcast where we explore the ethics of artificial intelligence with those shaping our digital future. I'm Roger Steer. Our guest today is Stephen Klein, founder and CEO of Curiouser.AI and a senior lecturer at UC Berkeley. Stephen and Curiouser.AI are pioneering what it calls reflective AI, and its AI system, Alice, designed not to give you answers, but to make you think more deeply about the questions you're asking. Stephen, welcome to ChatRog.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want the title corporate philosopher. That's the best title. That is the greatest title ever, with all due respect, sir. How do I get that title?
Well, you can use it. I can't copyright it, and nor should I.
I'm not going to steal it from you. You do it well.
Thank you. And please borrow it whenever you like.
I may. I'll license it from you.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Stephen, let's dive straight in. Could you explain in simple terms to us and our listeners, what is Curiouser.AI and who or what is Alice?
Thank you. We founded the company about 3 years ago, and it was a result of looking at what was going on in the industry and finding it somewhat concerning. A couple of things. The first thing we saw was that the entire world was prompting an AI, and no one was prompting us. I thought to myself, wait a minute, did all of humanity sign up to be prompt engineers? When did that happen? I missed that memo. And then I saw all of us were making an implicit trade. And what we were gaining was speed, knowledge, power, quantity. But what we were giving up was our ability to think. We were giving up our creativity, a little bit at a time. And I didn't think that was a good trade. I didn't like how that was going to end. And so that was one issue. The second issue was that the industry was focused on automation and not augmentation, meaning the entire business model was designed to attempt to replace people. It was a business model in which you could go into an organization, introduce your technology, explain how you could optimize process, improve efficiency, replace people, save money. CFOs love that story. That's like sex for a CFO. And so the entire industry was designed based on that ROI. Those two trends I found disturbing. And so what we did was we built a company to design an AI that flipped the script. And so Alice, our AI, inspired by Alice in Wonderland, because Lewis Carroll said something I thought profound, which is that imagination is the only weapon in the war against reality. I too am a philosopher at war with reality. We educated our AI to be curious, to ask questions, to help slow you down, not speed you up, to try and enable you to push the boundaries of your own limits so that we could make people better, we could elevate humanity, and we could create jobs. And so that is the essential essence of our philosophy. We are a majority woman company, which is, if not unique, unusual in Silicon Valley and in tech. So we have a very unique perspective. And that's the essence of how it is we are different and what it is we do and why it is we do it.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that explanation. And it aligns very closely with my own experience with business leaders who are less interested in some of the sexy stuff you talked about. They're too interested in the sexy stuff, but they don't think. The time they invest in thinking and decision making, if they were sports teams, they'd be beaten every time because they're just not training. They're thinking they're not asking the right questions. And I spent some time this morning. I signed up for a trial with Curiouser.AI, and I've interacted with Alice, and it's incredibly different from a normal scripted large language model. And I would recommend all our readers to have a go.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that and I'm grateful. The AI has a long way to go. There's a lot of development work we're doing right now. We've got a tremendous vision, but the promise is there and the essential nature is there. I think thinking is hard. It's supposed to be hard. I don't think you can necessarily speed it up. And, when thinking gets easier, it's not thinking. And to your point, that's what concerns me. We are becoming so enamored with speed and with the performance of tasks that almost feel like we're all being turned into monkeys, cogs on an assembly line. And that's what a lot of the large management consulting firms offer because that's how they think. It's industrial age, industrial revolution, process optimization. It's Taylor coming in with a stopwatch and saying, how can we go faster? How can we do more? But that all flies in the face of innovation and of creativity. That all speaks to the bottom line. That all speaks to short-term profit, but it doesn't speak to longer-term top line or revenue growth. Because in order to grow your top line, you need to differentiate yourself. You need to innovate, and that requires a lot of thinking. It does. And it's hard. It's supposed to be hard.
Absolutely. I want to dive deeper into that in a moment, but just for our listeners, how is Alice different, obviously without giving away any trade secrets, from large language models using stochastic prediction like ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude? Can you give us a sense of how it might be similar or different? How does it ask questions rather than give answers to scripts?
First of all, Alice is built on top of a series of foundational models. So essentially, she sits on top of, from an architecture perspective, GPT, Claude, and Gemini right now, closed source models. So you've got the layer of foundational models. And then there's a technology layer that we've built on top of that that blends the models into one so that we can triangulate data and we can go wider on the knowledge base. But then there's this layer of technology that's proprietary that we've built called reflective AI. And that's where we have uniquely trained and educated our AI to understand Socratic methods, to understand ontology, to understand epistemology. We use various RAG technologies and so forth to inform the AI. So Alice essentially thinks more like a philosopher, and she has been educated not just to ask questions, but to actually listen to the response, and she adapts the conversation in such a way that she can, we hope, help you think more critically and ultimately get to first principles. That's really the goal. There's an algorithm that was invented by Toyota in the 90s, very simple algorithm called the 5 Whys. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It is
Absolutely.
so elegant and yet so beautiful in that it really puts the emphasis on why someone is doing what they're doing. Why? And so you can't go any further. There's a bit of that going on as well right now with Alice. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Ultimately, we will build our own foundational model. That is our goal. And ultimately, we will migrate from a closed source to an open source model for a bunch of reasons, one of which is we can lower our costs so we can offer our product at a lot less money and still make money. So the product roadmap is closed source to open source. It's our own foundational model. And then extend the experiential education that we provide Alice that's already unique so that she does think different
Thank you,
by
Stephen. And
being curious. But curiosity is the key.
absolutely. And just for those of our listeners who haven't come across the Socratic method or forgotten about it, because our world is driven by people telling other people what to think. The Socratic method is a dialogue, a conversation between two people, one asking good questions, and the student thinking about responses. And as you say, it's a bit like the five whys. The if you keep going deeper into those questions, you get more and more out. And it just struck me that business education, certainly within employers, is very rarely like that. It's instructional, not dialogical. And I think that I really think that if you can build something like this at scale, it'll make a huge difference to the way people think about the big questions that we're facing. We're facing some massive existential questions, Stephen, aren't we? I mean, the world's on fire.
That's what I mean, when I forecast, I do some economic forecasting, and I isolate Gen Z as a generation. And I look at, from a regression perspective, where that unemployment rate goes if we continue on the current trajectory. And we're talking 15, 20% unemployment of our younger generation in 5 years from now. And ultimately, that is what I think concerns me most, because I believe it's our responsibility to find ways to create jobs. And the only way we're going to create jobs is by encouraging innovation and enabling critical thinking. It's the only way we can do it. And so that's where we're pointing our AI. That's where we're pointing it. Now, the technology can just as easily do what we're doing as it can automate. So there's going to be a lot of other companies doing what we're doing, Roger. I welcome that. I welcome that. I do think that this is where the industry goes, and that's what makes me so optimistic. Anthropic has talked about Socratic trained models that they want to deliver into the education market. OpenAI has recently talked about some similar sorts of methodologies. I find it ironic that they're thinking about that exclusively within the realm of education, as if, okay, you're in education, you need to think, but our main product will, for business, you don't need to think. Ultimately, I think ultimately we'll figure all that out, I believe. But
Mm.
I'm optimistic. It will scale. The technology is already there. It's just more of a philosophical and design challenge than a technology challenge.
Can you give us a flavor of any of the projects or questions that the system has been asked?
We have private equity, believe it or not, private equity
Mm.
clients who are principals within their firm who have a number of companies they've invested in. And each company they've invested in has various challenges they face in terms of brand, storytelling, product development. And Alice is, and we didn't anticipate this, being used to a large extent by PR companies, private equity companies, and even some venture capital to help support the portfolio companies and or the clients, to challenge them, primarily to help them develop marketing programming at this point, to help them create narratives and messaging that differentiates them in the marketplace. That is actually one of the use cases that is being used. Another company that we're working with is building rowing machines, and they want to look at crew as a way in which they can not only move into the fitness business, but they can also introduce community, maybe solve some loneliness issues, and turn it into more of a lifestyle. And how do they actually develop that app, put it into the app store, and think about that from a business development standpoint, from a marketing standpoint? Alice is good at helping somebody work through those issues, work through those challenges. It's mostly either small to medium-sized businesses that are looking to develop their brand and their story and their position, and or companies that work with other companies that do that. That's currently where our market has evolved. Now, having said that, we only launched 2.5 months ago. And so it's still early days for us. And we're gating cohorts in terms of how much Alice we put into the market. We're limiting it because we're small and we're bootstrapped, and we want to make sure that we can manage the scale. But that's where we're at right now, Roger.
Okay. Okay. You and I have met already on LinkedIn and comment and like and argue with, not with each other, but with a lot of the heated
I
debate that
find
goes on that
myself
platform.
arguing, I find myself getting into arguments with people, and I'm not really an argumentative type, but I think if you don't have the conventional perspective, you're going to get into some issues in this industry right now because there's $100 billion being spent to push a narrative,
At least.
at least.
And one of the biggest arguments on LinkedIn within the AI community is this battle between cold digital technology and creativity, empathy, imagination, all the human strengths. And there are some very serious academics who are very concerned that we're anthropomorphizing chips, wires, and code, and we talk about Alice as a she, and we talk about Socratic methods. How do you, at a philosophical level and a practical level, help people use your emerging technology in a way that doesn't suck them in to think that they're actually dealing with another human being, but almost a mirror, an echo to how they think? It's a bit like almost talking to yourself in a way, I guess, which of course is the first
It's
sign of
actually talking to
madness.
yourself. It's actually talking to yourself a few seconds into the future
Mm,
because it's, in a sense, it's an autocomplete,
yeah,
stochastic prediction engine, right? Very sophisticated simulator that is hard to differentiate from a human sometimes, quite frankly. It's pretty amazing technology.
it is. And you've made a very clear points about the fact that you want Alice to support the humanity in us as human beings and to encourage that creativity and so on and so forth. And lots of the big tech companies have developed AI friends and therapists, and lots of people have got value from them, but also people are dying as a result of following some of the advice they've been given. I mean, they're in the news almost every week. There's some poor kid who's taken an overdose or committed suicide another way as a result of a conversation with an AI therapist. How are you creating the safeguards and the guardrails within the Alice system so that people don't fall into that trap?
Well, I think that, first of all, and I'm going to put children aside for now. I don't think children should be using these products, quite frankly. And I think that's even a controversial view. I mean, Google is now selling products to 13-year-olds. OpenAI recently did a deal with Mattel to incorporate GPT into Barbie dolls. That concerns me. I see an awful lot of industry consultants pushing AI first really hard into schools. OpenAI and Anthropic this last semester around spent tens of millions of dollars giving their products away on university campuses across the United States during finals week. I don't agree with any of that. And I think that's where the business has gotten ahead of values. And I think that's where there's a bit of greed going on. So let's talk about adults, if you don't mind.
Please.
I'm going to give grown-ups more credit than I think a lot of people will. So I'm going to use the analogy that when I go to a movie and I see Brad Pitt in a film, or I go and see James Bond, or I read Lord of the Flies, or I read Alice in Wonderland. I suspend belief, and James Bond is real to me. Superman is real to me. Batman is real to me. Alice is near and dear to my heart. But I know they're not real. I'm not an idiot. And I think that people understand that these generative AI products aren't human. I really do. And so I think the argument as to whether or not we should be anthropomorphizing technology or not, I just think that's a red herring that the industry has thrown out there. And I really don't know if that's as big of a problem. Now, are there edge cases? Absolutely. There are edge cases, and they're awful. But I mean, when automobiles were introduced, automobile no technology can ever be introduced into the world without certain dangers. It's just not possible, right, Roger? I mean, fire couldn't be scaled without danger. Automobiles, any technology that's planes. So I think that that danger is slightly exaggerated, and I believe will take care of itself over time because humanity will become more educated. People will catch on to what's going on right now. And there's an awful lot of false information flying around right now, a lot of false narratives. So I guess my response is I don't see any necessary danger in working with a generative AI as if it was a thought partner, because I believe most people know that it's not.
Mm.
I really do. I don't think people are that stupid.
I agree, most of them aren't, but as you say, it's the edge cases that we have to be aware of. I love your analogy of going to see a film
Right?
and
I mean,
suspending.
are we lectured on going to film movies and, James Bond is not real? Don't get tricked and fooled by Sean Connery. I'm showing my age. I don't know. I don't know. And
No,
okay, so do we call, okay, let's do we call GPT it or he or she? Or they? Is that a debate we ought to be having? Maybe. I can tell you from a very personal level, I work with GPT every day. My AI doesn't compete. I work with 5 AIs every day, and I don't feel right calling it it. I don't know why. I don't. I call it he. Now, the industry and these professors that you talk about will lecture me, maybe even ridicule me for doing that. But I'm not doing that because I think GPT is human. I'm doing that because I think it reflects more on who I am by treating it respectfully. And I know that may sound foolish, but I think that our humanity comes to the forefront as we learn to interact with this technology. And I think it's more important for our evolution to potentially think about it that way from a respect, polite perspective, because I think it will help us be better people, even though I know GPT is not a he, Roger, but I don't feel comfortable calling it it. I don't know what AIs you work with. I work with Grok, Gemini. I love Claude, GPT, Mistral to some extent, Llama. I've obviously got my own. I'm not comfortable calling them it. Are you?
I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I don't
Okay.
think of it as it or they. I think of them as they, maybe, because I think
Okay.
that's quite a nice use of the English language. It's quite old in terms of usage. As you're talking, as I said, I like the film analogy and the suspension of disbelief, but I also think about the way that we give children cuddly toys, which are not real, they're not alive, they're not pets. But if a child is given a teddy bear or a doll and it helps them sleep, we're not worried about that because ultimately, deep down, the child knows it's just stuffing and material and all the rest of it. But that level of imagination, giving it an identity is not a bad thing. It helps us practice perhaps the way we ought to be with other human beings. And you've just triggered a sort of train of
Roger,
thought
that
in
is
me.
absolutely fascinating. You're actually taking this in a direction that I hadn't thought about it. Forgive me for interrupting you. That is
Please do.
absolutely that's absolutely fascinating. No, please going. I hadn't thought about it that way. And you raise a very, very compelling issue right now.
And if you go to the archaeological record, we've had wooden dolls unearthed in human graves thousands of years old. And what I would love to see, and if there's any anthropologists listening to this podcast, I would love them to get in touch with us, with you, Stephen, and with me. And let's have let's have a conversation about whether or not generative AI is actually another version of the wooden doll that's been around for thousands of
The
years.
argument, the argument that people would bring to that is because it simulates humanity more closely, and because it may feel more human, it may be more dangerous, I suppose. That would be the argument that I think somebody would bring to your discussion. I don't necessarily buy that argument. Again, when I raised my children, I have 25-year-old twins, boy-girl twins. Their imagination was just beyond anything I'd ever seen. My son would draw pictures and create worlds around cheetahs. Cheetah was an animal he loved. He could cheetah world. Or they would get rocks on beaches and start looking at the rock as boats, and they would move it through the sand, and they'd bring it home, and they'd play for hours imagining that rock was or they had dolls, small cars and so forth. That is a fascinating way to think about it. To your point about anthropologists, sociologists, maybe philosophers, ultimately, as we scale Curiouser, I want to have anthropologists, sociologists, philosophers, child psychologists, linguists, folks expert in Wittgenstein, language, postmodernists, all part of the development product process. I think they should all be represented. I think there's a lot more going on here than pure engineering. And so I think that is the direction this goes in. And I don't think we have all the answers yet. What I like about this discussion and what I respect most about you is I think we're asking the right questions.
Thank you. Well, and your input is incredibly valuable. I just move on to your model and the sustainability, the commercial sustainability of what you're doing, because you are taking a very different direction to the big tech, the open AIs, the Anthropics of this world. It appears that reflective AI seems harder to commercialize. It's slow because it's slower and more personal. How do you see Curious surviving and growing in such a market? Do you see potential for partnering with some of the bigger operators and almost, instead of being an alternative, a complementary application of generative AI to their scripted models? Do you think that could be the way forward?
I think that is one very viable strategy that will likely happen to some extent, to some degree. When we first introduced the idea, and I would talk to people about it, they would respond, in a way that was like, you're crazy. Let me make sure I understand this. You want to create an AI that's going to force people to think more critically, slow people down. Who wants that? And I thought to myself, well, I'm hoping there are people still out there that still want to think. And we're signing up a lot of people, Roger. Okay. So let me just take my message alone. The message that I'm bringing to the market right now, which to your point is somewhat unique. On LinkedIn alone, in 4 months, I've gone from 0 followers to 50,000 followers. So I'm adding about 500 to 1,000 followers a day on LinkedIn. Now, why? Why am I doing that? The reason that's happening is because there are people out there who actually agree with this message. The industry doesn't, but I think humanity does. I think the market does. And I think that the industry is going to finally catch up. So that's my first response. My second one is we're signing up hundreds and hundreds of people who want to use our product. Furthermore, we're charging $5 for a 2-week trial. You know that.
Right.
No one else charges. I'm basically saying to the market, this is a value, and we're not going to give it away. We're a business, but we believe that there is value and that our ability to help you be more creative, make better decisions, think more deeply matters. And people are purchasing trial periods. So from a waiting list, which we have a waiting list, but from a waiting list to a 5-week, 2-week trial, we convert 30 to 40%. That's unbelievable. And then from the 5-week trial, we convert, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 20% that go from the trial to $25 a month. Okay, so I charge more. So I charge $5 for 2-week trial. We charge $25 per month for the subscription. People are paying. Why? There's value. They see value in it. So I'm going to come back to my initial perspective, which is I'm going to give humanity a lot more credit, and I'm going to be a lot more optimistic about where this goes. Now, let's talk about businesses for a second. Let's talk about the enterprise and what's going on there. Okay. Roughly 80 to 90% of all generative AI pilots right now within the business world have failed. Statistically, you can look that up. McKinsey, according to Korn Ferry, roughly 80 to 90% of the S&P 500 CEO believe they've moved too quickly and they've made some mistakes. What's going on? I would argue that the industrial age automation model that's being pushed hard by the management consulting firms isn't viable and isn't sustainable and is not helping these businesses at all. What else is going on? They're hiring people back. The current generative AI, as it's being sold as a replacement for humans, isn't viable because it makes errors 30 to 70% of the time and it hallucinates. My model is an augmentation model. I'm basically suggesting that, Roger, I'm not going to replace you, but maybe I can make you better at doing what it is you do. So you can talk to Alice about your podcast, about your philosophy, and you can explore with a thought partner. So I actually believe that what we're doing is going to scale and that the automation is going to fizzle out. That's what I believe. Because right now, the management consulting firms, and I don't mean to demonize them, but the management consulting firms are the ones really leading the charge. They deconstruct the office into a factory, and they look at the process as a manufacturing assembly line, and they try to incorporate the AI as a machine within that assembly line to make things go faster, to increase throughput, without much of a thought to quality, because speed saves money. That isn't sustainable, Roger. That isn't how businesses operate. And so I guess I don't agree with your initial supposition. But that may be because I'm the CEO of a company that's doing something different. So I certainly have some bias, with all due respect.
I want to just explore some potential here for Curiouser and Alice and you. And that is, I think right at the top, we were talking about some of the massive existential crises we face. They're not going to be solved by people writing a script and asking ChatGPT or Grok or Llama how to solve the world's problems. So my big question towards the end of this conversation is, do you see real potential for your work and your colleagues in helping us strengthen democracy, tackle climate change, all of those other, social unrest, political drama, because they are clearly coming from people not listening, not asking the right questions, not thinking deeply. And it's a leading question, Stephen, but what are your thoughts around that? This is an ambition that goes beyond how big can your firm be. It's how much of a difference do you think you can make because of the very different approach you've taken?
It's a great question. I think at fundamental level, right now, society and business are operating and coming from a place of fear. And what the industry has done has borrowed from the playbook that sugar invented in the 50s. When sugar started catching some heat because science caught up with it and realized it wasn't as good for you as they thought, the industry didn't like that. So the industry spent a lot of money cooking up research, buying institutions, buying universities, buying professors, buying doctors to front that research to convince everybody that sugar was good for you. And then in the 90s, tobacco did the same thing. I don't know if you remember all the ads with the doctors smoking and the nurses smoking and if you wanted to, be sexy. And I would argue that a lot of the problems we're having right now with generative AI is that the industry has borrowed from that playbook and is spending a lot of money right now to generate this false narrative that we all need to go faster and think less, that we're all behind, that we're all going to lose our jobs, and that the world is going to come to an end unless we either, buy their products, attend workshops, and go to conferences and spend money and hire consultants. That we're all coming from a place we're all coming from behind. We're all trying to survive. And that's the narrative. That's going to go away because it's not true. And eventually sugar will be found out and cigarettes will be found out and generative AI will be found out. I believe when the whole thing shifts to a more positive and creative narrative in which we can all improve ourselves, amazing things are going to happen. I really do. So I believe that our AI specifically and a lot of other companies that will be doing similar things to what we're doing. I honestly believe that there's going to be a lot of AI products like ours. It has to go in that direction. So I believe the answer is it will basically leverage and amplify human creativity, human imagination, and I think it will unleash an enormous amount of positivity. And I have a lot of faith in this technology, and I have a lot of faith in humanity. If this is okay, I'm going to go. I don't know if can I go a little bit longer,
Please,
Roger?
please. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm in the process of, I'm currently writing a book working with Georgetown University. And the book is called Age of Meaning. And what the book is looking at is a quantitative back vision for where this all goes. And right now, I think that 90% of humanity predicts that this goes in a very dark place, that we're all heading for darkness. We're all going to lose our jobs. And so within that environment, why is anybody going to care about the climate? I'm not even going to care about the next generation. I'm going to try and grab as much as I can right now before the music stops and I lose my seat. It's like musical chairs. So we're all operating in this really horrible way right now, right? But here's how I see it. I agree that everything that can be measured is going to be automated. I don't think you can stop that. So repetitive tasks, things that can be measured will be automated. I also believe that we are moving toward a post-IP world in which the typical protection a business would get around intellectual property won't be as sound a moat as it once was. As evidence, Exhibit A is that 5 companies stole 90% of the internet in order to train their AIs. What more do you need to know? That toothpaste is not going back in that tube. So if everything that can be measured is automated and we live in a post-IP world, now let's go one step further. I believe we live in a post-regulatory world. I believe we're heading into the Wild West. I don't think that the United States government right now in Washington or the Chinese government in Beijing have any interest in regulating this industry. I don't know if you've noticed, but what I've noticed is that they're moving in the other direction. Europe can try. They don't stand a chance against American and China and our rest of the world. So now we live in a world that's automated, that IP is becoming less and less of an issue, and that regulation is basically becoming less meaningful, and there's less remedy and less enforcement. What does that leave us with? That leaves us with everything that can't be measured is going to become the differentiator. That everything that can be measured in efficiency is going to become commoditized. It's going to become the level playing field. What's going to make one business better than another and one person better than another are our ability to compete in a way that is defensible from a way in which I believe represents meaning. Okay, now this is my vision, that we are going to have a world in which we essentially compete on values, on ethics, on ideas, on imagination, and on trust, because that's what's going to be left, which means that companies like Apple and other companies are going to create sovereign ecosystems that will basically service customers and service workers in such a way that they literally bond together based on that trust, based on those values, based on that imagination. And so I think that this is an extraordinarily, extraordinarily positive view that I believe we're going to enter into, that we're going to head into. That's where this has to go. That requires faith in humanity. That requires having faith in Tim Cook as CEO of Apple. That requires having faith in Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, because they're going to learn how to compete, and they're going to realize that that trust that their customer has for them and that the workers have for them becomes imperative. And I actually believe that that's where this goes. And I call it the age of meaning. You can call it whatever, I guess, you want. But I believe we are going to leverage these technologies to solve our most challenging problems. And that right now, this age of automation, fear, mongering, darkness, fundraising, that's what this is really all about. I think that'll die a slow death. And what will emerge is something much more wonderful. And I think you could look at it as sort of what happened to the internet in 1999 and 2000. It collapsed because it was a bunch of companies who were greedy, who were raising more capital than they deserved. And eventually they couldn't sustain that bubble. And what emerged after the collapse was an internet that I think on average provides value and creates jobs and didn't destroy the world. Did it? At least not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. So the short answer to your question is yes, it will help solve climate change and a lot of the other issues that we're facing.
I love the idea of the age of meaning and your eloquence around everything can be measured. We're not interested in that anymore. And the thing we can't measure, to take it right back to moral philosophy, is love, hope, courage.
Yes.
And I think those philosophical concepts, and I think that was implicit in everything you were saying, Stephen, is a wonderful way of us beginning to conclude our conversation today. Before we do finish, I'd like to ask you if there's anything else you'd like to say to our audience before we close.
Two things. The first is that every innovation that has ever manifested itself within the history of humanity always started in the imagination of one person. There's no exception. Everything started in the imagination of one person. And so human imagination is always going to be that special asset that makes us distinct from the machine. That isn't going to change anytime soon. That's the first thing I'd like to leave the audience with. The second thing is that when it comes to the impact that AI has on industry, right now we're thinking about it as a job replacement machine. that saves money in the short term. That's basically how we're looking at it, because that's how we've been told to look at it. That's the narrative that we're being fed. That is not sustainable. That is not what's happening. That's not even happening now. It's a fiction on LinkedIn. It's a fiction because a lot of these people and professors are getting paid a lot of money to say that. Where do you think the $100 billion is going? A lot of people are getting bought to push the narrative to generate that fear, and it feeds on itself. So I guess what I want to say is that leadership in these large companies and in smaller companies are going to realize that there's a powerful technology here that can enable them to create value and that they can build stronger relationships with their customers. They can introduce better products. They can improve their revenue. They just have to lead from the top. They have to bring people together and unify their organization. They have to welcome their customers into the fold and not put bots between themselves and their customers. And the first companies that figure that out are the ones that are going to crush everyone else. And that's where capitalism, ethics, philosophy, and technology all converge in a singularity that's going to propel humanity forward in, I think, an extraordinarily wonderful way. And I believe if you do the math and you look at the numbers and you look at what's going on, that's where this leads. And I'm 100% certain of that.
Stephen, with that message of hope and certainty, thank you so much for joining us today and for the thought-provoking insights you've shared with us. I've learned a lot. Listeners, if you want to experience Curiouser.AI, I recommend you sign up for a trial. It's very different from any of the other LLMs you will have used. Thank you also to you, our listeners, for joining us today. Please share any feedback because we're new to this. And if you enjoyed CHATROG, do like, subscribe, and share it with your friends and colleagues. Join us next time as we continue to question not just what AI can do, but what it should do. Thank you.